Riding the momentum, I would like to now invite on stage Ms. Amrita Tripathi, founder and editor, The Health Collective, and founder, Tap and Tribe, to moderate the next session on being future ready with our distinguished guest, Mr. Sanjeev Bikhchandani, founder, InfoEdge, Mr. M. Damodaran, chairperson, Excellence Enablers, and former chairman, SEBI, UTI, and IDBI. Over to you, Amrita.
Thank you so much. And that is a huge packed audience, so thank you all for being here. We're going to follow that great example and stick to time. I think you have the middle seat and mic. Okay. I'm going to dive straight in to some questions. We will have time, hopefully, for some interactive question and answers towards the end. So we'll ask for a show of hands when we're ready, and would love for you to have your questions ready. Let me start by asking you both. You've both been pioneers in your field. You both have a legacy you can be proud of. How does that feel? This is a sort of set the context. How does it feel at this juncture when you're seeing all that's going around? Mr. Damodaran, we can start with you. What keeps you motivated? What keeps you going? And of course, you're on several boards. You advise a lot of people. You both do a lot of mentoring. What is it that keeps you going at this stage?
Number of things, but I think most important, the fact that tomorrow brings hope. And you hope it will be better than today. You know it will be better than today. You got to work at making it better than today. And that keeps me going.
Oh, I love that. Thank you. Mr. Bikhchandani?
So I spend a lot of my time with startups, mentoring, investing. And I think when I meet young people, young founders with new ideas, trying to do stuff, and I look back to the time when I was starting out, and these guys are so much smarter. And meeting young, smart people, keeps me going.
I love that, yes. I think that energy, and it's hard to stay jaded when you're faced with that energy and that hope. Let me ask you, the point of this panel is to talk a little bit about what it means to be future ready. What are some of the tangible takeaways we can get from both of you? How do we understand the changes? Things always seem to be getting more complicated. There's global instability, there's war, there's been a lot of talk about what's happening with the economy. There's also this idea, some of you may have heard, that we've moved from this VUCA world to a Bani world, which is brittle, anxious, non-linear, and incomprehensible. So let me put that very simple question to both of you. What does being future ready mean to you?
I think first got to define what the future is. The future is not tomorrow. The future is not day after tomorrow. You got to look at it slightly long term. It's not making the incremental changes that makes the short term ahead of you better than it is. So you got to understand your organization. You got to understand the world in which you live, the change taking place around you, the change taking place within your workforce, within your company. You got to reset some of your targets, rewrite some of your objectives. See whether your present workforce is relevant for the challenges of tomorrow and day after. Upskill them where necessary. Bring in the skill sets that are missing. But most important, don't be afraid to take the tough decisions. There is no future if you are taking the softer, easier decisions. There are hard decisions you need to take. And those decisions might relate to products, it might relate to processes. Most importantly, it might relate to people. Yeah. And I think you need to take those decisions, have the ability and the willingness to decide, because that is how leadership manifests itself. That is how you gain trust. That is how you demonstrate fairness to the organization. A whole lot of things, but I thought I'll touch on some of those that need to be done.
And I look forward to digging a little bit deeper into these harder decisions we sometimes have to take. Mr. Bikhchandani, in terms of how you look at being future ready, how can we even be future ready?
So look, the environment is changing continuously. It's changing at a faster and faster rate. And quite honestly, I learned long back that I can't personally keep up. So you need a great team. It comes down to people always. So if you got great people and they bring the learning into the organization, and they're themselves learning, and they know stuff, and they figure out stuff. So ultimately, being future ready boils down to having great people.
Having great people. And there's a saying that you shouldn't be the smartest person in the room. I think that's a good lesson for all of us if we're looking to lead. But let me follow up quickly with a question on, what everyone has been talking about this year is Gen AI. What is the impact? It may have an impact on our jobs. It may have an impact on the workforce. It's certainly going to have an impact on the way many of us show up in the near future. What do you both make of that? Mr. Bikhchandani first.
So we are still looking at it, figuring it out. There are about 14 or 15 experiments going on within Naukri itself on how we can use Gen AI to improve our offering, our products, the way we work. It's still early days, but some experiments are yielding results. We'll see what happens going forward. But this, again, is a situation that's continuously evolving, right? So in the beginning when it came, we sort of, our guys say, hey, this is nothing, this is okay. But increasingly as Gen AI improves, as ChatGPT improves, we are finding that there are many, many areas where you can productively apply it. Is it pushing people out of jobs? Not yet, right? Will it, maybe it'll improve productivity. Maybe it'll, in some areas, say, oh, this can be done Gen AI, but you move the people elsewhere to do other stuff, more value-added stuff. So we'll continuously adapt and evolve. And yes, some jobs and job profiles may change, but I don't think there'll be large-scale unemployment.
Just love a show of hands from the audience if in your organizations you're thinking about Gen AI already. Yes, thank you. Mr. Damodaran, what do you think in terms of how people should be preparing themselves given what's happening?
At a personal level, I am not worried because I don't hold a job. So there is no threat to any job that I'm holding because I don't hold a job. I think this actually is going to be the major change going forward. Is this something you should be frightened about? I don't think so. You need to figure out what its possibilities are, how this is going to play out, and how you can use it to your advantage. I remember, and this audience is a very young audience when you look at where I come from, when computerization was first introduced in the railways, I know there were demonstrations saying that, our jobs will go away. In fact, people wanted to physically prevent, the computers being taken into the rooms, people lying in front of the railway offices and things like that. Now what's happened? You don't hear about this. If you tell someone today that this is what happened and computers were seen as a threat. So I think at every stage you will run into some new development, some new manifestation of better technology, something that redefines the way you go about your work and your life. But you must learn then to look at that as something that you cannot control. Therefore, you must take advantage, position yourself to take advantage. The experiments that he's doing in Naukri, I'm sure, is going to empower them to better respond to the challenges they have, redefine the challenges and better respond.
So, you talked about being future ready, and I said having good people. About maybe 8 or 9 years ago, we said, listen, we've got to start investing in a team for data analytics, machine learning, right? And it was very early in those days. Gen AI had not come, but this is a difficult team to build. It's expensive also. But we, out of an article of faith almost, we said, let's add people. So now we've got a good, solid team. I think among the Indian .coms, Indian tech companies, we perhaps have the best capability in this area. Now analytics, machine learning, AI, is a kind of, it's one team, right? And we now have a very large team, a very capable team to do it, and that is being future ready. We did not anticipate Gen AI, but when it came, our guys could figure it out. So back to great people.
Great people being ready to adapt and upskilling. I do want to ask you both, there is this thought that going forward, maybe not in the immediate future, but human skills, what they call the soft skills, which I think are a misnomer, but things like empathy, things like leadership, things that humans bring to the table are going to be more and more important going forward. I want to ask you both about leadership and empathy and how you both show up as leaders. Mr. Bikhchandani, there was a recent article in Forbes, which I was really, it was quite heartening to read this. It says that your team, during any of the recent crises, and this goes back to the .com bubble, for those of you who remember that, the pandemic, your team took a decision, you and your leadership team, not to lay people off, even though you had to take a haircut, even though you had to look at those numbers, I think Q on Q. How hard was it to kind of walk that talk, and what led to that decision?
So, see, first of all, we are a highly profitable company, and we've got large cash reserves. Therefore, we have the luxury of riding through a crisis without having to sack people necessarily, so long as we're willing to compromise on profits. So long ago, we took a call that we'll sacrifice profits before we sacrifice people. And up until now, at least, and we're okay if, we're okay with the stock market volatility as a consequence. It's okay, we live with that, right? Now, in the global financial crisis, after Lehman went down, there were 2 quarters in a row where Naukri YOY growth was minus 26%, minus 25%, right? And there was no light at the end of the tunnel. And we simply said, hang on, we'll ride it through. We've got enough cash reserves. We're still profitable. It's okay, right? And we rode it through, and within 3 quarters or 4 quarters, the market recovered enough to get our growth back. Our competition, on the other hand, decided to sack people. Now, when you sack a whole bunch of people, we figured it kind of scars the organization, right? And when the market came back, they were not ready to take advantage of the growth coming back simply because they had sacked so many people. They had to build the capabilities again. So when we went into the global financial crisis, our traffic share was 47%. When we came out 4 years later, it was 63%. Okay? And a big part of that was not sacking people, in my view. Okay? We also didn't cut investments in marketing and advertising to the extent that our competition did. That also helped, right? So the second instance was when COVID hit, right? So April, June 2020, that quarter, lockdown, Naukri growth YOY minus 44% in billing. Okay, no light at the end of the tunnel. We didn't know what was going to happen. No vaccine. We were, standing on balconies and bajawing thalis, right? And we just asked the CFO that, given the cash reserve in the company, assuming that increments are 0, assuming revenue is 0, assuming marketing expenditure is 0, how long can we survive? So he quickly did the math and said 3 years, right? And then we said, okay, if it's 3 years, hang on, don't do anything. This is the wrong time to sack people. They're as distressed about COVID. They don't know what's going to happen. They're your people. You can't let them go, right? So we'll stay with it. We'll see what happens. And sure enough, we came back.
That's incredible. I don't know how many people...
No, but we have the luxury of having the cash.
So one thing is, obviously, you have to have an eye on the bottom line. You have to have a profitable, sustainable business. Do you feel today that if there's any advice you're giving people who are trying to weather what's a potential crisis, upcoming, looming, we've been hearing all year, do you think that's something you would advise people?
It depends on your situation. If paise hain, to, you can do it. If paise nahi, you can't print money, right? So your focus actually should be to build products that are so good that your customers want them, your clients want them, and you earn the margin in the terms of trade that gives you the cash cushion to be able to ride out the rough times.
That's fair. I don't still see that many examples of people doing that, but I'm happy to be contradicted on that. Mr. Damodaran, when you look at leadership, empathy, and some of what we're talking about, how important do you think that is?
There were references made to COVID. I think the one good thing that COVID helped, and even COVID has its advantages, everything in the world has positives, right? I think what COVID taught us was it helped us to distinguish between employers who are empathetic and those who are not. It was very clearly visible. If you needed evidence, that was a time to look for evidence. I don't run a large organization, but the way I rationalized, I have a few people that work with me. I gave all of them additional money. I said, this is when you will need the money. Keep it. You don't have to account for it because we don't know what tomorrow is bringing. So I don't want that for want of resources, any one of you should suffer. And I think that helped a lot because people then tend to see you as understanding their issues. Empathy travels very far in any organization. Problems will come and go. There will be crisis. You may have to reinvent the organization, but the empathy will run through both the original form and the transformed entity that you are dealing with. So if I look at what leadership amounts to, in my book, L in leadership is for listening and learning, and then next comes E, which is empathy. If you don't have these, then you're not a leader. I mean, you might be occupying the top position in the organization, might be an accident that you happen to be there, but accident of birth, whatever, but you are not a leader. Leadership is never ex officio, and I think difficult times demonstrate that. That leadership doesn't derive from the position that you hold. I think it's important to empower people so that they're ready to face the more difficult times, the more challenging times. You need to incentivize them and you need to hold them accountable. If you have these three elements in the organization, I always compare it to a young parent teaching his or her child how to cycle. There is a time up to which you hold on to the cycle while they're pedaling away, thinking that they're the ones who are riding it, but you're holding from the back. And then at some stage you let go. That empowerment in the organization is what will help transform them. Otherwise, they are like pawns on the chessboard. You can't have, till the pawn actually goes to the last row, the pawn is a pawn at the end of the day, right? But people need to understand they are contributing partners in this enterprise. And I think that will come only with the right kind of attributes that leaders bring to the table.
And we are talking about, obviously, the importance of all of this is you need to have the healthy profit margins, as we heard. How do you build in transparency and accountability? I'll start with Mr. Damodaran. You've been talking about, and recently looking at an Inc. 42 article and event, corporate governance is ever more critical. We see so many examples in the media of things going wrong. You were quoted as saying it entails doing the right things at the right time, in the right manner, for the right reasons. It sounds simple when you say it, but there are so many things that go wrong. Can you talk to us a little bit about this?
That is the way we have chosen to explain corporate governance. If you have these 4 rights, you won't get too many things wrong. Some things might go wrong. They're not controllable. So we were trying to demystify what this animal called corporate governance is to an unsuspecting audience. They thought that this was a set of rules, procedures that had nothing to do with rules and procedures. It was about doing the right things, as you said. The understanding must be very clear that corporate governance is a necessary condition for an entity to sustain itself in the long term. It might not be a sufficient condition. You need to have products, you need to have customers, you need to have markets, all of that is there. If you simply have corporate governance and nothing else, it will be a good story which will come to an end very quickly, right? But it's a necessary condition. And if you look at corporate history, not just in India, but even outside of India, look at the top 50 companies that were there. Look at all those good to great, look at all those things. How many of them are around? Some of them fell by the wayside. And if you actually look at it closely, they fell because there was no transparency, there was no fairness, and people didn't know why some decisions were taken. In fact, the worst organizations are where your workforce reads about your company in the newspapers. And as happens in my house, for example, my wife gets up 2 hours before I do, so she reads the newspapers before I do. If there is bad news about any company that I am associated with, she would have seen it before I did, unless I got to know it from within the company. So you've got to communicate. I think also communication is critical. If you don't communicate at the right time and send the right messages across, you will have a problem that will
And you've talked
catch
about
up with you.
conflict of interest being a primary reason
That's
for
right,
things going
yes.
wrong.
In business, in your family situation, anywhere, conflict ought to be identified and rooted out. If there is a conflict, you have a problem, and if you don't get that addressed quickly, no matter what you do, how great your business is, you will have a problem. Could be conflict that you have somebody in your company that has a personal agenda that is in conflict with the company's agenda. It's entirely possible. It could be several other things that you need to address, and therefore, I think conflict got to be rooted out. And the other problem, I call them the terrible twins in the governance space, conflict and asymmetry of information. The asymmetry you cannot bring to zero, but you must consciously work at reducing it to manageable levels.
Ms. Bikhchandani, you have not just the companies you run, there's so many that you invest in. We've been reading a lot about, of course, Zomato, Policy Bazaar. Do you find that these are common challenges when it comes to corporate governance?
Well, the first thing we want to do is be well governed ourselves before we try and tell other people how to be well governed, right? And as a founder, I've always been personally honest, but I've realized the nuances of corporate governance as the organization gets more complex are such that it's not just about being personally honest. Right? It's about surrounding yourself with the right kind of people who get this stuff and they advise you. So a little example I'll give you. So year 2000, we raised money from ICICI Venture. As part of the shareholder agreement, they said, you need a Big Five auditor. Then there were five. You need a Big Five auditor. And I said, don't be silly. We can't afford it. I'm honest. I'm honest. We're totally clean. There's no problem. They said, no, we need a Big Five auditor. So after a few months of saying no, I relented. And I went shopping for a Big Five auditor. Somebody is quoting X, somebody is quoting 3X, somebody, whatever. And I was looking to just get a Big Five auditor within a reasonable cost. So finally, I met a gentleman name is Kaushik Datta from Pricewaterhouse. He sat and chatted with me. He said, okay, I like you. Tell me what you want. So I said, look, last year, our profit before tax was 1,80,000 rupees. So I'm prepared to pay half that as audit fees. So give me an audit in 1 lakh. So he said, okay, I'll do it on 3 conditions. What? He said, first, at a 1 lakh rupee audit, I can't work very hard, right? So therefore, you have to promise me that you will not conceal anything, you will not lie, you will not be devious. I said, no, that we will not be, I can guarantee you, because we aren't like that. He says, okay, great. The next thing you have to tell me, you have to internalize the understanding that your auditors and your independent directors are there to save you from yourself. They are not policemen from the outside who are supervising you. They are on your side. They are there to save you from yourself. Now, if Indian founders, if you understand that, right, it will solve 90% of the problem. Right? And we had many conversations of that nature, going forward. But fundamentally, in a young company, in a startup, in a growing company, in an entrepreneur managed company, corporate governance begins in the founder's head, right? Because no matter what systems and processes you put in, if the founder doesn't want to be well governed, doesn't run a well-governed company, he'll find ways around all those systems and processes and board members and independent directors and auditors. And we have seen that in company after company in the past, right? So in my view, there are many nuances to corporate governance. It's very good to understand whether it's conflict of interest, whether it's how you treat minority shareholders, whether it's all those things. But fundamentally, it begins in the founder's head.
That's fascinating. And I think that story is going to stay with us also when we look at this. There are ways to share that you have questions through the app. I'm going to presume this clock is accurate, so we have some time. If you're putting questions into the app, we'll have someone check that. You can also, through a show of hands, we can see if we can pass a mic around. I do want to ask you both while I wait to see how that works. What are some leadership tips you wish you had known when you were starting your career, or maybe midway through your career? Mr. Damodaran first.
I wish somebody had told me that it's useful to be organized. No one told me that. I learned that the hard way. You sometimes bite more than you can chew. You sometimes think you are a great genius, you can multitask, and then you discover every single task is performed suboptimally. So some things that tell you more about yourself. One thing which I have learned over the years, and this is a test I prescribe to people that are willing to listen to me, is two M tests. The first M is a mirror. So when you have some doubts whether you're doing the right thing or the wrong thing, go and look at the mirror. The person that looks back at you from the mirror will tell you whether you're doing the right thing. If you have the courage to look into that person's eye, maybe you're on the right track. But if the mirror fails, and sometimes what people do, they have the problems with their face, but they wipe the surface of the mirror thinking that's where the problem is, that doesn't help. The second M is mother. So mirror and mother. Go and ask your mother if she tells you you're on the right track. She might not know the business, but invariably mothers have instincts that, and that is why they say that since God can't be everywhere, he created mothers. So go back to mothers and go back to your mother and ask them, right?
My mom is also going to love that. I will quote that back to her.
Yeah, so look, I began to work when I was 21 years old in 1984. And I was totally clueless about how companies worked, organizations worked, and I had joined an advertising agency as a trainee in the client servicing team. Now, in that job, I quickly discovered I was at the bottom of the food chain, right? I was responsible and accountable, but I had zero authority, right? So I had to get work done from people who were not reporting to me, who were older than me. And there were competing demands in that time. And if they didn't do my work, nothing would happen to them, right? So it took about a year or so, right? But I learned the importance of having great people skills the hard way, right? I learned to beg, I learned to cajole, I learned to coax, I learned to be nice, I learned to be humble. A lot of rough edges got worn off, right? So I didn't know it when I began, but I got to know it in about a year or two, right? The importance of people skills. How do you get work done from people who don't necessarily have to do it, who are not reporting to you, right? That's really, people have to want to work with you. Are you the kind of person whom people want to work with? And I think that quality really helped me as an entrepreneur when I had no money and I had to put a team together, right? And not pay people anything other than stock, and somehow get the work done.
Yeah. And do you both think that leadership can be taught? I just want to understand. Do you think you can teach somebody how to be a good leader, or do you think they have to kind of learn it by doing?
You don't teach anyone to be a good leader. I wish no one attempts that, because people improve by observing others, by absorbing. In fact, one of the greatest managers in English football was asked, "What do you think is your strength?" He said, "The power of observation. I observe. I want to take that a little further. Any young person who observes and then absorbs what he thinks is valuable will go places. There's no question about it." I think it is about what is a leader at the end of the day. I define leadership as a very simple thing. It is creating the enabling environment in which every member of your team performs to the best of his or her potential. You don't have to be the best. This is cricket season. England used to have a captain called Mike Brearley. He wouldn't have qualified not for the first 11, but for the first 25 on the basis of his skills. He was in the playing 11 because he was a great captain, and he could bring out the best among from the other 10 guys. So you got to create that enabling environment. People will learn from there. You got to empower people and not be a respecter of age, seniority. If you don't have meritocracy in the organization, the good guys will leave. More problematically, the bad ones will stay. And then the organization will go to seed even earlier than you can recognize that. So you need to see what potential resides in people and then place them in situations where they grow. I don't think you teach leadership to anyone. No, you shouldn't even attempt that.
So look, I think you can sensitize people to various aspects of leadership, give people examples and stories, right? And therefore they may perhaps get to know a little bit more. But ultimately, you can't teach leadership, right? You've just shown some examples, you've told some stories, you've given some dimensions, right? And so on. But ultimately, leadership has to be practiced. You got to learn it. It's an apprenticeship. You hopefully have got bosses who are good leaders, you know, or you like somebody, or you admire somebody and say, okay, how does he do it? How would he do it? So till date, I remember some of the people I worked with in my first job back in '84, right, okay, as being really good leaders. I still remember them, okay? And I was 21, the head of the branch was 29, but he was a great leader according to me. I'm still in touch with them. And a lot of the things I have learned are from just emulating, and it's an apprenticeship.
I love it. As
There's another dimension to that, if I may, which is there are some people whom you observe and you ask yourself the question, how would he or she have done it? And they're so bad at what they do, then you do the opposite.
That's also true.
There's also learning in that. Right? Yeah.
We've done this in sessions where people tell us who they don't want to be like. Okay, we do have some questions. Please go ahead.
Look, I think the first thing is that you've got to save the organization and the jobs of at least some people, right? But if you want to lead by example, first take your salary to zero, right? Then have senior leadership, take salary cuts, and then see how many jobs you can save. But sometimes hard choices have to be made. But if you've done your job and the product good enough and your margins are good enough, it won't come to. So I have not been tested because it never came to that because we had the luxury of, so that's a bit of a counterfactual, hypothetical question, but this is what I think.
We have some questions coming on the app as well. Let me start with the one on empathy, bias declared. Nirupan, thank you for this question, Nirupan. How to know if your employee sees your acts as empathetic versus a handout?
Okay. You want to take that? Yeah. No, it's not the easiest of questions because you're not asking me how I see it, but how someone else sees it. I think in the way they react, in the way they interact with you, in the way they go about their work, in the way they respond to what you believe is an act of empathy, but the more important thing is that they need to see that as empathetic to their situation. They're all reasonably intelligent people. I think they learn to distinguish between what is genuine, what is bona fide, and what is a handout in order to buy peace on a temporary basis. People learn to distinguish that. You don't have to work very hard at it. But the general atmosphere in which, and no one in the organization is by himself or herself. People talk, people share what their thoughts are. And from that you will get to know, it will get back to you in some sense that it's being perceived rightly rather than wrongly.
Sure. Shivendra has a question for Mr. Bikhchandani. How do you suggest CHROs make themselves accountable?
So I won't talk about CHROs. I'll talk about HR, the HR function in general. I have long held the view that you will be a much better HR professional if you actually have line operating experience. So rather than join the HR department straight away out of a PM and IR or HR management course, maybe it'll be useful to do 5 or 7 years in sales, in manufacturing, on the floor, in customer service, where you actually get operating experience, where you are accountable, where you have targets, right? Operating targets. And then when you move into HR, I think you will be much better at that job than simply joining HR straight away. And that's something organizations have to think about and decide, because it'll mean a complete change in the way currently they recruit people in HR, for many organizations.
We have a question here. I also like to see some women raising their hands with questions. Would love to. Okay, there's one right there. Thank you. Okay, go ahead.
Do you want to go?
No, you go first.
Okay. Good morning, Sanjeev. Good morning, Mr. Damodaran. It's great to see you again.
Yeah.
I'm right here. I think the spotlight's on you.
I can see you. Not an issue.
Blinding.
Yes, yes.
So the question is, the session is about being future ready, but the fascinating thing today is that future is not definitive as it used to be. It's very uncertain. It's not about the long-term future, but near future and medium future. Leadership in this time of absolute uncertainty about job, profession, business model, geopolitics, everything together, how do you lead and how do you convince people to be leaders in these times?
I think the one thing that we must all realize is that you don't hand out solutions to people to deal with the problems of tomorrow. You create the skill sets in them, the thought processes, the confidence that they can handle what it comes in. That empowerment in terms of the attributes that prepare them for tomorrow. Some people actually, in fact, I do a bit of coaching. And one of the principles that I follow is that a coach should never become a crutch. Because you shouldn't be the person on whom the coachee keeps leaning on, because then you are a total failure in what you have attempted to do. You've got to prepare that person to be on his or her feet in order to deal with the problems that they have. So I think uncertainty is a good thing. The world would have been a boring place if there was no uncertainty, if there were no challenges. Not that I want to use gender-specific expression, but that unfortunately is what the English language has used. It is uncertainty that tells the men apart from the boys, who, you know who has what it takes to stand up, to lead, to be counted, and to create the confidence in the people that are members of your team. I think it's also about empowerment. I will again give an example from ancient cricket history. There were two teams when I was a young man that visited India. One was the Australian team led by Richie Benaud, who later became a commentator, died a few years ago, and the other was led by Ted Dexter. Now it's very interesting. I observed this as a student, and I was sitting in the stands observing this. When the English team came out to the field, Dexter was there in front and everybody was 10 feet behind him. So he was walking all alone. When the Australian team came out, you couldn't see where the captain was. They came out in a mixed bunch. He was somewhere there in the middle. Everybody was equally important there. There was no one guy telling the rest of the world where you walk. So I think empowerment, creating confidence, self-esteem in these difficult times, self-esteem sometimes takes a knock. People ask themselves, do I have what it takes? Yes, you have what it takes. But somebody should help you realize that you have what it takes, and then they will find the solutions.
We can take one last question, I think, given the time. But that's the takeaway for all of us. You do have what it takes. I'm going to take that as the takeaway. Yes.
Yeah, hello, good morning. My name is Meenakshi Negi. I'm from a startup Dot1 Solutions. We are basically into time and attendance. My question is to you, Mr. Sanjeev. In the beginning, you said you are working with startup. So, as per your experience, what do you think startups should consider to write down a success story, and what mistakes they should avoid?
So, look, I'll only tell you from my experience. There are different routes to success. And no one route is necessarily the best one. Right? There could be others. I think a few of the principles that guided us. Number one, we were extremely frugal. Kharcha kam, amdani zyada. Okay? Life will be okay. Second, we were very, very closely observing. Mr. Damodaran talked about a keen observer. We used to observe the customer, our clients, job seekers, very, very closely. Okay? And that is where the idea of Naukri came from. Okay? Because I used to observe people in my last organization where I worked, which is a large multinational corporation, that everybody would, this is 8990, everybody would read Business India from the back because the appointment ads were at the back of the magazine. And that's when I figured that job information is, people want it. So that's when I figured that if you aggregate job information and keep it in one place, traffic will come. You won't have to spend on advertising. And that's what we did when we launched Naukri. We just got 29 newspapers from around the country, and you take the appointment ads and put them on the net. And that's how Naukri was launched. We had no money for advertising, but traffic came anyway. So it's from that observation, because we were close to the customer. So I'd say be very close to your client, your customer. I tell every founder, please make sales calls yourself. Don't just delegate that. Because when you make a sales call yourself, you meet your client, you meet your customer, you get feedback, you get to know different use cases of your product, you get to know, some of our best ideas have come from our clients because we went out and listened. So simple thing, and I'll stop here after that. This is 2001, right? We had, going through the dot-com meltdown, we had only 16 months of money left. Our salary bill is 4 times our revenue. We're probably going to go under, right? Simple growth hack. We had a sales team going out and meeting people in recruitment teams in companies. I just started a Yahoo group. In those days, there was no WhatsApp. And I said, whatever the client says to you, let's say you do 3 sales calls a day, whatever the client says to you, just put it here on this group. And feedback began to come in. That this is working, this is not working, why don't you think of this, and so on. So basically we harnessed the voice of the customer through our sales team. Simple growth hack, and we just kept on improving the product. And so our innovation pipeline was actually ideas from customers, not our own ideas.
That's fantastic. Sorry, we're out of time, but I hope you will join me in thanking our panelists for this amazing masterclass. Thank you so much. And thank you to this audience. You've been fantastic. We'll end here.